Good morning. Today we are starting chapter number 2, that is dual effect of transaction and types of accounts. In this chapter we'll cover some important points like meaning of business transaction, then classification of business transaction, then identification of cash and credit transaction, when it can be said to have cash transaction or credit transaction, then voucher, meaning of voucher, how many types of vouchers are there, then dual effects of transaction, debit and credit effect of transaction, then types of account. Mainly accounts are classified into 3 types that we'll discuss in this chapter. Then rules of debit and credit, 3 rules are there, that also we will discuss in this chapter, and steps of debiting and crediting accounts. So we are starting with the meaning of business transaction. So what is business transaction? The exchange of product or services of business for cash and or credit between 2 or more than 2 persons. ठीक है, हर ट्रांजेक्शन को हम बिजनेस ट्रांजेक्शन नहीं कहेंगे. इट हैज़ टू सेटिस्फाई सम कंडीशंस, सम प्रिंसिपल्स विच आर गिवन, and then only it will become a business transaction. So what is the meaning? Exchange of what? Exchange of product or service. Means if you are dealing in goods, then you will exchange goods. If you are dealing in services, you are providing services, then you will exchange your service. If you are engaged in the activity of asset, then you will be exchanging the asset. So product or services of business for what? As we have studied it, so it should include monetary consideration. Okay, so or either for cash or for credit. ठीक है, अभी पे करेंगे कैश में या फिर फ्यूचर में पे करेंगे. So it should be on cash basis or credit basis. Between whom? Between 2 or more than 2 person. 2 या 2 से ज़्यादा लोगों के बीच में ये ट्रांजेक्शन होगा. So business transaction is the exchange of product or services of business for cash or credit between 2 or more than 2 person. Now which provision or which condition it should satisfy to become a business transaction? So it has to be a business transaction, means it has to be a transaction of business. Then another thing is it should be economic transaction. So as we have seen, it should include cash or credit basis. So it should be economic transaction. And we have also discussed in the previous lecture that only economic transactions are recorded in the books of accounts. Then economic transactions should have monetary value. It can be measured in terms of money. Then business transaction can be in cash or credit. Okay, it can be in cash or credit form. Then business transaction can be internal and it can be एक्सटर्नल. ठीक है, इंटरनल मीन्स जो बिजनेस के अंदर ही होता है एंड एक्सटर्नल मीन्स विथ द थर्ड पार्टी. सो इफ इट सेटिस्फाई दीज कंडीशन देन इट विल बिकम अ बिजनेस ट्रांजेक्शन. Now second point is classification of business transaction. So business transaction can be classified into economic transaction and non-economic transaction. Now when it can be said that the particular transaction is economic transaction, so if it satisfies 2 conditions, then in that case you can call a particular transaction an economic transaction. So first condition is exchange of cash for goods, asset or service. ठीक है, जब आप कैश एक्सचेंज करते हो फॉर व्हाट? फॉर एसेट, फॉर गुड्स और फॉर सर्विस. अगर आप गुड्स में डील कर रहे हो, आप गुड्स एक्सचेंज करोगे फॉर कैश. इफ यू आर डीलिंग इन एसेट, यू विल सेल योर एसेट एंड गेट मनी. If you are providing services, then you will provide your service and get some return. So in this case, if it will be called as economic transaction. And the other condition is creation of relationship of debtor creditor for asset, goods or services. अब इन तीनों ही केसेस में जब आप एसेट में डील कर रहे हो, गुड्स में डील कर रहे हो या फिर सर्विस प्रोवाइड कर रहे हो, अगर आप अभी एट अ टाइम पे नहीं कर रहे हो और यू आर प्रोमिसिंग टू पे इन फ्यूचर, मीन्स इट इज पेएबल to the person in future or receivable in future, then in that case the relationship of debtor creditor comes into existence. So in that case it will be called as credit transaction. So in both the cases it will be called as economic transaction. So mainly there are 2 types of transaction, economic and non-economic. Economic involves cash or credit transaction and non-economic means the transaction does not involve any cash or does not involve any credit transaction. So economic transactions are further classified into cash transaction or credit transaction. Now cash transaction or credit transaction include what? Cash transaction of goods, asset and services. Then another is credit transaction, means you are dealing in credit transactions if you are purchasing something and promise to pay in future, if you are selling something and promise to receive in future, means amount is payable or receivable in future. So those transactions will be included in credit transaction. And other transactions include what? Other transactions include some transactions, for example, goods destroyed by fire, then goods destroyed due to water, or we can say goods theft. Okay, all these transactions are the example of other transactions, means the transactions which are not included in cash or credit transactions are classified in other transactions. Means goods अगर किसी भी तरह से destroy होता है, अगर आप goods as a donation किसी को supply करते हो, so all these transactions are covered under other transaction. Then another classification of economic transaction is internal or external. So as we have discussed, internal means internally in the business, then external means with the third party. So external includes sale of goods to third party, then sale of assets, sale of services. Okay, all these transactions are the example of external. And internal transaction include goods destroyed due to natural calamity. So this is the example of internal. उसमें कोई third party involved नहीं है, ठीक है, जो भी है वो internally है. So depreciation, this is also the example of internal transaction. So economic transactions are classified into cash or credit and internal or external transactions. So this is the classification of business transaction. In the next lecture, we'll see one illustration based on this discussion.